We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style, and so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
Why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
It's a very interesting question.
The Bub Reports with Dr. Kellon Bub. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
Hello, everyone, and we welcome you to this week's edition of the Bub Report. I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellon Bub. We're happy that you can join us for this week's edition of the program. Of course, as I said last week, we are not going to have a live show where we are able to take your comments as the show unfolds, as I'm traveling this week. But, of course, our commitment to having a show remains. And we were able to gather a panel of experts this week to talk about what continues to happen in the Caribbean. Of course, before we get into the panel segment of the week, just so you know, we are following some of these developments, especially with respect to the travel advisory, this business of a travel advisory, level 2 travel advisory that was issued against Grenada by the United States State Department. That is an issue that we're following, and certainly next week when we come back, we hope to, that's in person again when I come back next week, we hope to give this some full-throated context. And so, of course, while we may not be able to take your questions live this week, we do encourage you to share the program. It's still a very important and critical program for us to watch and listen to today. And your comments, of course, in the comment sections are also welcome. Those comments are valid, and they mean a lot, and they add a certain level of richness to the discourse that we attempt to have here every Sunday. So what we're going to do now is to go directly into the editorial of the week. So please stand by for that. The Bub Report is committed to being fearless, balanced, and independent, bringing you the stories that matter most without compromise. Now do us a favor. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. You can also watch us on GBN TV every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Catch us on WPG10 television every Sunday at 8 p.m. Your support helps us to keep journalism free from bias and influence. And together, we can make sure every voice is heard and every fact is verified. Thanks for watching. Now, folks, we have all been paying attention to the developments in Venezuela and the impact that it's having not only on the world, but of course the impact that it's having on our own region. But while Washington has cited so-called narco-terrorism charges and security concerns, questions are being raised over whether Venezuela's vast oil reserves and its efforts to trade oil outside of the traditional US dollar system played a role in Maduro's demise. Venezuela is just not another oil producer. it holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, yes, which is estimated at about 303 billion barrels, according to global energy data. Now, that data is more than 5 times the size of US oil reserves. So what does any of this have to do with the petrodollar? Now, imagine if the entire world was forced to use one company's vouchers to buy the most important commodities on planet Earth. Now, that is essentially what the petrodollar system has been for the last 50 years. Now, the petrodollar simply refers to US currency, hard US currency, earned by countries from the sale of oil. Since the 1970s, most oil traded globally has been priced in dollars exclusively, regardless of where it is produced or consumed. Now, this means that countries importing oil must first obtain dollars before they can buy energy supplies. As oil is an essential part of the infrastructure for transport, power, industry, and pretty much everything we do these days is powered by fossil fuels, the demand for dollars remain constant across the world. Now, oil exporting countries receive dollars from crude sales. Now, these dollars are often invested back into the US economy, mainly through US government bonds and financial markets. This cycle keeps the demand high for both the dollar and US debt. Over time, this system has helped the dollar remain the world's most dominant currency and allows the US to borrow money more easily than most other nations. So how did Venezuela challenge the petrodollar system and met the same fate as Iraq and Libya? Now, facing years of sanctions, Venezuela began experimenting with oil sales outside of the dollar system. It accepted payments in other currencies. You know who else did that? Iraq and Libya. It accepted payments in the UN, in euros, and crypto digital assets, allowing it to bypass traditional US-controlled banking channels. China, which buys most of Venezuela's oil, supported this shift through the direct currency deals and long-term investments in Venezuelan oil fields. Despite sanctions, Venezuela continued to be able to produce close to 900,000 barrels of oil per day. This demonstrated that a major oil producer could operate without full dependence on the petrodollar, raising concerns in Washington that other countries could follow the same path. Now, have you heard of BRICS and the alternative currency that BRICS is attempting to develop? So what happened to the last 2 countries who attempted to do what Venezuela did? In the year 2000, Saddam Hussein's regime began demanding euros instead of US dollars for oil sales under the United Nations Oil for Food program. The 2003 US invasion, officially justified by false claims of weapons of mass destruction, was followed by the rapid return of Iraqi oil sales to the dollar system once Saddam Hussein was toppled and global oil companies returned to that country. Muammar Gaddafi, for example, was actively promoting a Pan-African gold-backed currency, the gold dinar, to be used for oil transactions instead of the dollar, which would have challenged Western financial hegemony in Africa. The 2011 Obama-led NATO intervention, which led to the overthrow of Gaddafi, is often cited by critics as a move to neutralize this threat, as revealed in released emails from the period. Now, of course, it must be noted that Libya also sits on major oil deposits in North Africa. Now, the petrodollar system gives the US several advantages. It helps keep borrowing costs low, it supports large government spending, and it strengthens the country's financial influence globally. Now, this is why challenges to the dollar-based oil system are also often viewed as strategic threats rather than just commercial decisions. In 2024, reports surfaced that Saudi Arabia had ended the petrodollar system. Now, while no formal agreement expired, Saudi Arabia did begin exploring limited oil sales in other currencies and strengthened ties with China in the process. And folks, we must remember that the dollar still remains the world's most dominant currency, and oil is still mainly traded in dollars. However, more countries are testing alternatives through local currency trade, digital payments, and regional partnerships. Of course, those countries might be getting a dose of freedom if they do continue along that path. Now, the Venezuela episode, therefore, highlights how closely oil, money, and militarism remain linked. While the petrodollar system is not collapsing, its dominance is being questioned more openly, setting the stage for gradual changes in how global energy trade is conducted. And while mainstream corporate media interests in the West peddle the war on the drug narrative, the real story here is American petrohegemony against the backdrop of an emerging multipolar world. Folks, it is important to follow the money. And viewers and listeners, thank you for staying with us for this week's edition of the Bub Report. And as we've been doing here on the Bub Report for the last 6 months, so we have been attempting to make sense of not only the military buildup of the United States in the Southern Caribbean, but also, of course, with respect to the recent developments in Caracas and the removal of the Venezuelan president. And what we want to do this week, folks, is to get reaction from across the Caribbean on this issue. Of course, last week, we were able to get experts from Guyana as well as Grenada to make sense of this. And what we want to do this week is to get reaction from Trinidad and Tobago and from the OECS with respect to what unfolded in Caracas. And really, we are asking the question, how will the removal of Maduro and the current quote-unquote Monroe Doctrine of the U.S. president test Caribbean sovereignty, unity, and resolve? And here to make sense of all of this is Dr. Bishnu Raghunath, who is a political scientist, as well as Mr. Cabral Douglas, who no stranger to the Bub Report. He is an attorney. Of course, he's also the secretary, the international secretary of the United Progress Party in Dominica. And another fun fact about Mr. Douglas, he is the son of the late Rosie Douglas, a socialist prime minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica. And I also attended school with his wonderful and charismatic brother, Kim. I see where Kim got his charisma from. So Douglas, thank you for joining us. And we have Dr. Isaac Saini, who is joining us. I believe he's a Trinidad and Tobago national, but he is a historian and Cuba specialist joining us from Canada. Gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the Bub Report. Certainly, we are living in some very historic times. Wherever you sit ideologically on this issue, this is, again, perhaps some might say history repeating itself. Some might say that this is a way of folks who are not necessarily interested in history now being able to appreciate what it was like in reality and not in abstract terms. But Dr. Raghunath, I want to begin with you because last week on our program, we were attempting to get reaction from Port of Spain, and Shane Mohammed, a colleague of yours, graciously put us on to you. So Dr. Raghunath, what we want to do is to get reaction from Port of Spain with respect to how everything unfolded in Venezuela. And has there been any sort of, I don't want to use the word political fallout, but any political reverberation in the context of Trinidad and Tobago on what occurred in neighboring Venezuela?
Thank you very much for having me on your program. Let me just start by saying that I am not sure I can speak on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago or for Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, fair enough.
My resident post is at the University of the West Indies, but so I cannot speak on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago or give a Port of Spain opinion per se. What I will largely do is give my opinions as to what has happened in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have to start by understanding Trinidad and Tobago's politics to a large extent. When we understand Trinidad and Tobago's politics, that would probably make a little bit more sense to what is happening on the ground in Trinidad and Tobago. So Trinidad and Tobago is literally a divided society, a bipolar society. We have two major political parties, the PNM, the UNC, and supporters of one party while both parties are pressed about left of center or center, ideologically there's no major difference, and as well as philosophically. But the idea here is simply one which says the question that begs as to who they'll support becomes an issue. The present government, the UNC government, has always been or made it clear when they were in opposition between 2015 and 2025 that they were not in support of Maduro. In fact, they supported the Guaido challenge a few years ago, and they never literally supported the Maduro regime. As opposed to the other side of the coin in Trinidad and Tobago, the PNM, the People's National Movement, which developed very close linkages with the Maduro regime, and to that extent, they would have entered into various sorts of arrangements with the Maduro regime as we came into 2025, 2026. When I say that we are a divided society, bear in mind that we are divided and the supporters of one party follow the directions and the directives of the leadership of their party. So if today, for instance, we hear that Kamala Persad-Bissessar has always been opposed to the Maduro regime and has never recognized them as the legitimate government of Venezuela, that would be followed by their supporters, literally. And similarly with the PNM has always supported the Maduro regime, their leadership, and that is now the supporters of that party seems to be saying that, well, look, all the concerns that we have with regard to what is happening in Venezuela is legitimately so. Was Maduro kidnapped? Yes. Did they interfere in the sovereignty of Venezuela? Yes. And those are the sorts of things that we hear coming out of the PNM-based supporters. So that is the context in which we still are divided. There's no one common perception. There was a small protest by some civil society organizations after the Maduro was taken out of Venezuela. But again, that protest did not have any overwhelming support. Trinidad and Tobago has a third segment that we have to also bear in mind. And that third segment is the Venezuelans who live in Trinidad. And to be honest with you, we don't have any exact figures. Some people have estimated it to be close to 100,000 Venezuelans living in Trinidad since the crisis occurred in Venezuela several years ago. And many of whom, we only had about 15,000 who are formally registered. But the amount of Venezuelans we see here, that is a significant section now of our society. And that section of the society is one section that suggests that they want the Maduro regime gone totally. And should it go, then they may all decide, or majority of them may decide to return back to Venezuela. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But as it stands right now, that is a segment of the society which we cannot discount. And they are the ones who are literally egging on, for instance, the US to simply complete the job, get rid of the remainder of the Maduro regime, and then they could take things from there. As it stands right now, so there's no common position with regard to where we are in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago, however, officially made it quite clear that they were not part and parcel. The government, at least, made it quite clear that they were not part and parcel of the military action which took out Maduro. Yes, they were in support of the U.S. In the region, and they were in support of the U.S. in the region as relates to dealing with the issue of trafficking, illegal trafficking of drugs and humans and those sorts of things. But as to the fact of there was going to be regime change, Trinidad and Tobago had always said that we are not in support of regime change by force, and to that extent, the government has stood that position. As to whether or not people believe it or not, that's a whole different question.
Well, I was about to engage you on that question as to whether or not people believe this or not, because, I mean, we have seen, for example, that a radar was installed in Tobago, unbeknownst to the people of Tobago.
Which law was supposed to take?
Unbeknownst, well, I'm saying in addition to that, there was a doubles summit. I coined it the doubles summit there, Professor Agunat. But there was also sort of the what some of us in CARICOM, well, I shouldn't say us, but what some in CARICOM see as sort of the echoing of the rhetoric, the Trumpian rhetoric by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. So many folks were surprised when Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar, at least I'm speaking now from a Grenada perspective, when she came out to say, well, hands off, I don't know anything about that. And folks are saying, well, if you don't know anything about that, what about the radar? What about all of the military cooperation? What about the rhetoric about, in respect of the extrajudicial killing of the fishermen, kill them all violently and things like that? So I was just, as an addition to what you articulated here as to whether or not people believe that we had no part in this.
Okay, so we have to put all of that too in context. And as an academic, I have to put it in context.
Correct.
When we look at what transpired with regard to the military cooperation that Trinidad and Tobago has with the United States, bear in mind that did not start this year or last year. Mm-hmm. That started years ago when Trinidad and Tobago first signed the SOFA agreement with the United States.
And that is the Status of Forces Agreement.
Status of Forces Agreement, just to be clear. And in fact, in 2024, when that contract was renewed, and it is something that we need to emphasize here, where that contract was renewed by the former government, the PNM government under Keith Rowley, there were additional issues that were added into there. So for instance, do you know now that based on the agreement, the 2024 agreement, that the U.S. forces could land in Trinidad, and mind you, they need to get official permission, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But the point about it, the agreement allows them that once they are here, they are not subject to Trinidad and Tobago law and those sorts of things. And those are some of the things that we have to bear in mind, that this did not start in 2025 or in 2026. This started way back long before that. So the SOFA agreement is one of the things that would have ensured that, for instance, a lot of the things that we would have seen in Trinidad and Tobago, and in fact, this is not the first time that we've seen military vessels coming in and using Trinidad, well, not using, but rather coming into Trinidad. There have been military exercises with the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard and Defense Force with the US and so on. So this is simply a continuation of what would have transpired by way of agreements long time ago. So that is one part of it. The other part of it is that over the last several years, since the crisis erupted in Venezuela, we've talked about the porous borders of Trinidad and Tobago, and Trinidad and Tobago clearly had no capacity to enforce its border protection. In other words, the Coast Guard that we have, in fact, on many occasions, it was actually raised in Parliament. How many of our Coast Guard vessels are operating? And I mean, the government sheepishly said probably 1 out of 15 or 2 out of 15. So there was no way of managing the borders. That lack of ability to manage the borders and to control the borders of Trinidad and Tobago ensured that Trinidad and Tobago was a free for all in terms of Venezuelans coming into Trinidad, bringing trafficking in drugs, in animals, in meat, in humans, everything. And that, I think, when the government of Trinidad and Tobago, when the United States first of all said that they were going to send their forces in the region to deal with drugs and the transshipment of drugs and human trafficking and everything else, the illegal transshipment, the government of Trinidad and Tobago immediately said, yes, we are into that because we cannot protect our own borders. And if you are going to assist us in that regard, we are grateful for that. So that is the context in which we have to put it in. So when the Prime Minister said, yes, kill them violently, and you see again, for most of the rest of the Caribbean, north of Trinidad and Tobago, they may not be able to understand the extent to which Trinidad and Tobago has treated with this situation from Venezuela. I mean, like I said, we have 100,000 Venezuelans living in Trinidad, the majority of whom, I mean, you have, and you talk about people from the ages of 2 years old or even younger than that, to elderly people, and they are all here. Many of whom are illegal, they're not registered or anything like that. They're eking out a living. They are dependent, and once they are here, they are dependent upon and receiving, for instance, free health care and so on, all of which is a cost and a burden to Trinidad and Tobago. And the only thing that I think we have not really given to them is that their children have not been able to access free education. That's a major upset for a lot of them, but the mere fact is simply that they are beneficiaries of all the other facilities in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is literally a cost on Trinidad and Tobago. So that when you look at that cost, when you look at the fact that we have, like I said, let's just be conservative, let's just say 50,000 additional people in Trinidad and Tobago competing for jobs, competing for let's leave it at the legal aspect, the jobs and so on. But we know that there's also the illegal part. There's the drug trade, there's the trading in guns, trading in illegal items. I mean, they bring cheese, they bring honey, they bring all sorts of things. They bring birds, animals, all across, and all of these things are unregulated. And that is the context in which you look at and says, when the US government said we're going to deal with illegal trafficking, this is one of the things that the government would have said yes to. The one other thing that the government had said yes to early on was they had actually said if Venezuela was going to interfere with Guyana vis-a-vis the border issues that they have, the historical border issues that they have had with Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago is going to allow the United States access to Trinidad and Tobago in order that that access be used to defend Venezuelan territory. Trinidad and Tobago was the only country in the Caribbean that actually went that far to say, we are going to stand with our sister country, Guyana, and facilitate any sort of assistance that they may need in protecting their sovereignty. So, but that is an aside. For the time being, when we understand Trinidad and Tobago's position, that has been Trinidad and Tobago's official position. When I said earlier, for instance, how many people actually believe it? Well, to a large extent, many of, again, we go back to that divide, that political divide. If you're UNC, you'll support it. If you're PNM, you'll be against it. And that has been that divide that is working against us.
And so the polarization that exists there. But Professor, I want you to stick a pin, and I want him to bring in your other compatriot, Trinidadian compatriot. I'm not sure if you two gentlemen know each other, but as fate would have it, I suppose we have two Trinis here. I don't know if both of you all like doubles. It's like, yeah, just if you can unmute your mic there. There you are. Let me see. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Sweeney. Reaction from you, sir. You've heard.
I'm a Trinidadian, part of the Trinidad diaspora. You know, half my roots in Trinidad, half in Nova Scotia, Canada.
Okay.
So, I still think of myself as Trinidad. I'm very much Trinidadian in my.
You still have the accent, so.
Still have the accent. After over 30 years in Canada, I haven't lost it, right? And I have family.
That's
in
good.
Trinidad, in Port Fortin, in Siparia, in Cuba, in Port Spain, and San Fernando, right? So for me, the biggest issue of question when we think of context as well, right? And in the article I had published in the Daily Express, right, where I spoke about the dream of one Caribbean unity, and one of the themes of this thing is the question of Caribbean sovereignty, unity, and resolve. Was the issue that I know that's Caribbean islands, right, often dismissed as microstates, right? And there's all sorts of stereotypes about us. It's very difficult for us to navigate ourselves in this geopolitical world, right? That's been one of the most significant issues we've faced, right? But I think one of the contexts, when we think of the crisis in Venezuela, I'll point out, is the extent of U.S. economic sanctions that were waged against Venezuela to destroy its economy, right? And perhaps one thing that the Trinidad government could have done, I don't think would have had the power, would have been to insist, as it has voted at the United Nations against the U.S. economic sanctions against Cuba, which are the most long-lasting and perhaps most intricate and devastating sanctions ever imposed by one country and another country, and longest-lasting, as I said, to deal with the fact that a lot of the Venezuelan economic crisis, whatever the mistakes, missteps, and so forth, and errors of the Maduro government, has a lot to do with the U.S. economic sanctions, which were imposed when Chavez was there and deliberately designed, right, to destabilize the Venezuelan government, to destroy the idea that some people would argue that you could have this alternate idea of how you could construct and use the resources of a country, and to shatter the idea of an independent country, right, that basically, shall we say, defies U.S. diktat. In a U.S. national security strategy enunciated in 2025 by Donald Trump, it's very clear, and you just have to read it, that there's no nicety in the language, there's no subtlety in the language, there's no euphemism. It's about clearly saying that the Americas belongs whole cloth to the United States, all of its resources, and they will ensure that they will put in place governments that are compliant with them. And we know they've done this historically before, but it was usually done under covert measures and justified under the fig leaf of democracy, right, and good governance. They're now clearly saying this is about the plunder of resources and so forth. And I worry about the future of the Caribbean. Donald, as Henry Kissinger said, the U.S. doesn't have friends; it has interest. And Donald Trump is more blunt. The U.S. will just have tools it will use and then throw away. It seems very clearly. And how Trinidad will benefit from basically following U.S. diktat in terms of economic development, in terms of the further future of the country. It's very hard for us to see this as well. But I'm aware of the divide that exists. I'm part of various WhatsApp groups. I'm in Trinidad. I talk with friends in Trinidad and so forth. And the divide, as Professor Mamloga has pointed out, is very clear. In terms of what party people align with and so forth. But I think there are broader issues, right? And as academics, as people who can provide the context, as people who want to think towards the future, this has been very dangerous for Trinidad. I think at one point there's even that she said that the U.S. is Trinidad's only ally. You've seen reports of this, right? Okay, what does this mean for Caribbean unity? And how do we navigate as small microstates, isolated by ourselves in a geopolitical world if we don't achieve unity. And so these are very significant concerns with me. And I actually had a very interesting conversation with a new Trinidadian friend who was just visiting my city of Halifax in Nova Scotia this weekend, right? And had taken a position opposing the intervention, but was very concerned about the polarization, but it's very concerned about what happens in the future when you surrender your sovereignty, when you surrender your right to self-determination, and when you say basically we will accept the US imperial diktat.
And let me bring in Cabral. Cabral, I think it's important that we give viewers context. As I said, you are the son of a late Caribbean Prime Minister, Mr. Rosie Douglas of blessed memory. And so I suspect and the reason why I'm setting this up this way is because, again, to Dr. Sweeney's point about, I guess, American diktats in the region, your father, I suppose, experienced that.
Absolutely. And, I just wanted to reiterate my appointment as the International Secretary for the United Progressive Party in Dominica. Incidentally, Rosie Douglas held the same post on behalf of the Dominica Labour Party in the 90s, which led up to that particular party getting elected in 2000. So it could be a case of history repeating itself.
Well,
but
you might be breaking some news there,
Exactly. But as far as the context is concerned, Dominica watched in amazement, just like the rest of the world, as Nicholas Maduro was apprehended. I'll use the word apprehended to be politically correct, to avoid the word
you don't have to be. The man was kidnapped. Let's not be politically correct.
The word kidnapping has legal and political implications. So, but Dominic in particular would have had a very special relationship with Venezuela, the Venezuelan government over the years. Venezuela being the country first to recognize Dominican independence in 1978. The current Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit, developed a special relationship with deceased former president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, who visited Dominica, who assisted Dominica at the time when Dominica was under IMF scrutiny. That was in the early 2000s, 2004. After 2004, when he became the prime minister, he assisted Dominica in the extending of the runway at the airport, putting in light facilities at the runway. This was very crucial for Dominica to facilitate night landing, because up until that point, planes couldn't land in Dominica after 4 o'clock. So you would have to fly into a neighboring hub in order to overnight and then come into Dominica the following day. So Dominica has enjoyed a special relationship with Venezuela. And then following the passing of Hugo Chavez, that relationship and that kinship and that brotherhood was extended between Roosevelt Skerrit, current Prime Minister of Dominica, and Nicholas Maduro. So Roosevelt Skerrit and Nicholas Maduro were the ones that actually pioneered the Petro-Caribe Agreement, which benefited a number of governments in the Caribbean. But Roosevelt Skerrit was the first government in Dominica to sign up to that arrangement, which essentially provided for oil and gas and petroleum products to be sold at discounted rates on long-term loans, which was able to free up governments and allow more fiscal space for governments to spend money on social programs and housing, social programs in health, social programs in education. And it was a tremendously beneficial program to ease the financial burden on a lot of Caribbean states. So that's the context in which Dominica and Dominicans would view the capture of Nicolas Maduro. So to see, Nicolas Maduro being apprehended would have been a tremendous shock, particularly to the people of Dominica, even more so than the region and the world. So coming from that context, we have to remember that the sanctions, which were referred to by your previous panelists, on this regime go back prior to Donald Trump, right? The sanctions go back to the Biden administration after the last election in 2024, where wide reports have indicated that Maduro lost the election quite convincingly. The sanctions were increased There were reports of human rights abuses coming out of Caracas, as well as millions of Venezuelans being forced to flee the country. So that is an important part of the context building up to the Trump administration's actions against Nicholas Maduro. So previous governments as well have put out a bounty on Nicholas Maduro. The Biden administration put out a $25 million bounty on Nicholas Maduro. So these things predate the election of Donald Trump. What Donald Trump has done was execute with decisive action in the apprehension of Nicholas Maduro. And we must say, whether we agree with the action or we disagree with the action, the logistical execution of the action was unprecedented in terms of the military was in there at 2 o'clock. The suspects were apprehended by 3 o'clock. In terms of human rights, they were read their Miranda rights. They were transported. They were indicted on specific charges. The indictment has been made public. He was detained in an American facility. So these are all consistent with human rights norms that the world
but
has become.
They're not necessarily consistent with international law. International law does not give a country the carte blanche, unilateral authority to go into another man's sovereign state and decide that we are going to Mirandize you in a territory where international law is not even recognized. There is a warrant out for the arrest of the prime minister of a certain state in the Middle East that I'm not going to reference here. And, you know, he gets carte blanche to move about wherever he wants to. They don't recognize the International Criminal Court. So the pushback here is, well, you're talking about human rights and international human rights, but the U.S. recognizes none of that.
Yes. So the UN Charter, which is effectively an international human rights instrument that most of the countries in the world have signed up to, specifically makes reference to the use of force, as well as state sovereignty. In fact, the president of Dominica had an interview in China talking about the enforcement of international norms as it relates to the Human Rights Charter. And many of the commentators who have been commenting on the international legal questions have made reference to those specific clauses as it relates to the use of force and the recognition of state sovereignty. Now, when we talk about international rules, rules and norms have exceptions. I would say this is not the norm, but it's more of an exception to the rule. So when we talk about the use of force, for example, the use of force is justified in circumstances in a number of areas. For example, self-defense, for example. So if you are defending yourself against aggression, you are legally entitled to use as much force as necessary to extrapolate yourself from the situation. As far as the state sovereignty question is concerned, this is a government who was not recognized by the United States, not recognized by many countries in the United Nations. So the election of Nicolas Maduro as president is dubious at best because he wasn't recognized by the majority of people in his country and a number of independent states who are signatories to the UN Charter. So when we talk about the abduction of a sitting president, that is something that raises questions. Was he a sitting president? Was he legitimate? And there was a number of reports about crimes that he has committed against his own people, which has caused millions of them to have to flee the country. So whatever happened to the human rights of those individuals who were after forced to flee the country? What about the human rights of the individuals who were detained without charge? What about the human rights of the individuals who were suffering under this regime, which by all measures was an illegitimate regime? So these questions have to be put into the context of the discussion which we're having. So the United States government, in collaboration with the Drug Enforcement Agency, who was mandated with the task to apprehend drug dealers, executed a mission to apprehend somebody they suspected, apprehended, charged, and is now awaiting trial in the United States to determine whether or not he is in fact a drug dealer. And as we go forward, the answers to those questions will unfold, And in the event that he does not get a fair trial, within the system of the United States, he has the ability to seek legal recourse by appealing if he feels that
Actually, I have to say one thing here, right? Okay, because I'm really stunned.
Yes,
First, I'll say that I want to talk about. I didn't meet Rosie Douglas, and this is when I was young. I remember sitting down with Rosie Douglas, David Abdullah, and Tim Hector in Cuba, right? Okay, and Rosie Douglas actually was a friend of a cousin of mine here in Nova Scotia, who was very active in the struggle for human rights and civil rights in Canada. What you've actually stated here, I think, is a violation of everything that Rosie Douglas stood for as a principled anti-imperialist. I also have my PhD is not only, I also have a law degree, and I have a specialization in international law as well. I think you have presented for me, which is one of the most bizarre interpretation of international law and United Nations Human Rights United Nations Charter. There's the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and there's the UN Charter, right? And the UN Charter establishes very clearly when you can use force, right? Very specific things. And only, okay, even though we may say international law no longer exists, that the United States has completely shredded and destroyed the post-Second World War institutions, right? Okay, you can only use force when it's authorized by the UN Security Council, right? And the question of sovereignty, the question of self-determination and so forth are fundamental rights. The vast majority of international lawyers, right, have actually come out and pointed out that this is a fundamental violation of international law, that the U.S. has no legal right, both domestically, okay, on the basis of U.S. law, and international law, on the UN Charter and other covenants who actually have carried this out, right? And in fact, when it comes to drug dealing, the United Nations Office on Crime and Drugs basically said Venezuela is a negligible source of drugs for the United States. And in fact, the Justice Department just today, okay, acknowledged that this idea that there was this cartel de los soles, this huge drug
They actually removed that from the indictment too.
They removed that from the indictment. Right? Everybody knows this. And then Trump himself has made it very clear this was about seizing the oil resources of Venezuela and so forth. So I think this is the most bizarre interpretation of international law I've ever heard. It runs against what international lawyers are saying and so forth. But more important than that is the fundamental hypocrisy that Dr. Kellen Bob pointed out, that you have somebody who's indicted for genocide, probably the greatest of all crimes, and he can willy-nilly travel around. This is nothing about the United States caring about democracy. This is nothing about the United States caring about human rights. This is nothing about the United States caring about stopping drug trafficking. The history of U.S. intervention in the Americas from the 19th to the 20th century, and specifically after the Second World War, bears this out completely. And you just have to read their declassified documents. But international legal scholars know that there is no foundation in international law, there's no foundation in U.S. domestic law to justify any of this seizing and kidnapping of Nicholas Maduro.
Well, I think that...
Brother Douglas, I will give you a right of reply, and then we have to get on to the other pieces on the agenda. So go ahead with a quick reply, please. Yes.
No, I'll just say that as the images around the world will show Venezuelans, not only in Venezuela, but in other countries around the world who have been forced to flee the dictatorship of Nicholas Maduro, their jubilant celebrations and praise of the Trump administration would tend to disagree with the comments.
But there are massive demonstrations in Caracas that the media is not showing. Massive demonstrations in Caracas, right?
But Brother Douglas, if I may, just one quick point, and then Dr. Raghunath, I'll get back to you. If this is about drugs and quote unquote narco terrorism, I use it in air quotes really, then why did he pardon a drug dealer, the former president of Honduras, who was convicted by the same Justice Department that arrested Nicholas Maduro? And the president of the United States assertion here as well, the guy did not get a fair trial. Mm-hmm. And that is not what the jury of this man, I don't know how, again, the United States, if you're going to be bringing presidents,
yes,
leaders of other countries, you would want to bring them to The Hague or to the International Court of Justice. I think that's where they should go, not before U.S. court. But that's just, I'm no lawyer. I'm just
right. Well,
musing.
Well, no, I mean, look, Nicholas Maduro is going to be facing a trial and a jury of his peers, right?
Of his
We could
peers
debate.
in New
We
York?
could sit here. We could sit here and debate jurisdiction, whether the U.S. has the jurisdiction to bring the suspect to the United States. We could have that debate. We could debate whether or not he should be tried in an international tribunal, like they've done with Charles Taylor in Africa, for example, and other convicted of human rights and crimes against humanity, and
But
so
not
forth.
the president of Israel.
But the issue
The Prime
as it
Minister,
relates,
sorry, not the
but
president.
the issue as it relates to the oil situation is that the playbook of most communist governments is to nationalize industry, specifically the oil industry.
No, but no. But that oil industry is
I just want to make a point.
No. You can't have historical. The oil industry was nationalized under Andres Perez, who was not
Carlos Andres Perez. Yes, he was not
under Perez in the 1970s,
socialist.
in 1976. He was not a capitalist, who was not a socialist, who actually paid the U.S. companies compensation that amounts to about $7 billion in today's dollars, right? Okay. Other countries that are not so-called have nationalized before. Mossadegh, who nationalized Iran and was overthrown, right? We can talk about Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, who was not who nationalized. I mean, it's like to say that I don't understand. I'm sorry to react this way, but I'm just stunned at this distortion of history.
No, but the facts are clear. The facts are clear. And that is that Venezuela was one of the richest and most prosperous countries, not only in South America, but in the world. And now it's become a shell of its former self
because of U.S. economic sanctions.
Millions of
U.S. economic sanctions. How can you deny the U.S. economic sanctions that were designed specifically to cripple them? Over thousands of U.S. economic sanctions. You can just read it. Okay, designed specifically to cripple the Venezuelan economy.
Well,
that's the goal. If I were to surround your house, and cut off your water, cut off your food, and keep you in, how happy would you be? Your house would descend into chaos and misery.
The people of Venezuela overwhelmingly are of the view that the socialist policies of Nicholas Maduro has caused them to live in a living hell and have had to flee their own country. And they're celebrating his overthrow.
There are massive demonstrations against the U.S. intervention in Caracas.
Yes. So, gentlemen, we definitely have to get on to the other issue here because we don't want to get down, but I think context matters. Context matters, folks. And Venezuela there was a significant socioeconomic divide even before the Chavez era. History did not begin with the Chavez revolution in 1998 or whenever that was. Economic inequality existed in Venezuela before that. All of the oil wealth, if you go to Caracas, I've been there, and perhaps Dr. Ragunath would agree too. You go to Venezuela and you saw that divide. You saw the folks, the working people, a lot of the even Caribbean people who lived in the barrios, right? And then you go to East Caracas, and it was just absolute wealth. And so that oil, did they talk about the oil curse? But the oil curse did not exist only under socialist Venezuela. It existed under capitalist Venezuela as well. But we do have to get to the other point, which is really here, gentlemen.
Well, all of these are important contexts for the discussion.
Yes, of course. Yeah. But gentlemen, Dr. Ragunath, I felt as if there was sort of a tepid response from CARICOM on the events that unfolded in Caracas. Normally, CARICOM would provide very robust statements, but again, as someone in communication, as someone who understands rhetoric, I just felt as if the statements were a bit very just nibbling around the edges. Even Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, she's very passionate in her public communication on matters of geopolitics. Even her, she's had a lot to say about Ukraine and all of that. And even the Prime Minister of Trinidad, she said, I want no part of this, right? So, Dr. Ragunath, I want you to pick up on that. How would you assess this response? And would you assess this response perhaps in the context of sort of, the United States now flexing their muscles in a much more aggressive way that they have not done perhaps the region have not seen in this period, sir?
Well, thank you for getting me back into the conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
I decided that at best I'm a bush lawyer and I will not get into the legal arguments.
The legalese, both of us,
Let
sir.
the legal
Both of
people
us.
deal with that. Okay? No, but in all seriousness, I
Yes,
would
sir.
tend to want to agree with several things that need to be said and repeated.
Yes.
Maduro is illegally removed from Venezuela, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, he would have lost the election, but what the United States have done is nothing new. They have done it. We saw it happen with Bin Laden. They went into Afghanistan without permission, did the same thing, and they're going to continue to do and flex their muscle, which is the point that you have now come back on to.
Yes, sir.
And that flexing of the muscle, I think, is one of the things that even our Caribbean leaders were not confident that they were going to do. Because, I mean, when the US sent all of these naval assets into the Caribbean, people who said, well, all right, it's just flexing muscles. They're not going to do anything. They're not actually going to go on land. They're not going to go and take out and attack Venezuela. It's just a matter of trying to frighten Maduro so he will leave on its own. Well, of course, he didn't. And then they had no other choice. I think prior to the taking out of Maduro, we would have heard several of the prime ministers of the Caribbean making bold statements, and simply suggesting that the Caribbean must remain a zone of peace and all of those things. But lo and behold, from the time they took Maduro out, they went numb. And they went, Mom, why? And is it simply a matter now that just prior to they taking out Maduro, we noted that several other events happened. Policy statements were taken out in Washington. So, for instance, the issue with the visas for Antiguans and Dominicans. I mean, you got your fair warning. I mean, I am in a way, I'm happy that for the people of St. Vincent that Ralph lost the election. Because had Ralph been there, Ralph would have been one of those probably to suffer the same fate. Okay? And the mere fact that Venezuela, not Venezuela, the United States flexed its muscles with Antigua, with Dominica, and now went in there and showed them that we have the military might and we're going to go and take out Maduro. Who is going to stand up against the United States at this point in time? And until now, I am still waiting for a formal statement from CARICOM, because on Saturday at the news conference that Miyamoto had, and then on Sunday we heard it again, they're still waiting for a formal statement from CARICOM. I have not seen a formal statement from CARICOM as to what has transpired. Yes, Trinidad and Tobago came out and said we didn't have anything to do with his removal. But the point about it is, apart from that statement, no other CARICOM leader has said anything. The St. Kitts Nevis Prime Minister, who is now chairman of CARICOM, has gone literally mum. We have not heard a word from him. Miyamoto took to the front and made a statement. But again,
it was about tourism. It was about the disruption to travel.
What is her country losing, as opposed to whether or not we're going to stand up for right and what is right and sovereignty.
And the rules-based international order and all of that, yes.
And all of those things. And there was nothing to that effect. And that is where we really have to look at where we want to go. And this is where, I mean, if I may take this conversation a little bit further.
Yes, sir.
When Kamla Persad-Bissessar had said that CARICOM is no longer a reliable partner for the Trinidad and Tobago, in the context of simply saying that, I think she was making that statement in a context of simply saying that we need now to get a CARICOM position on some things. And really and truly, I tend to want to support as a political scientist that CARICOM has somewhat become dysfunctional. It has become dysfunctional to the extent that the Caribbean Common Market has not been able to enforce a lot of its decisions. We see the CSME fledgling away. We see freedom of movement amongst member states not everybody's taking it up. Then we come to the Caribbean community and we look at the CCJ and we say, yes, Trinidad and Tobago has been blamed for not being part of the CCJ, but it's not only Trinidad and Tobago, it's talking about Jamaica and various other countries. And you ask yourself, what has happened with CARICOM? And I think that is one of the concerns that I would have in terms of moving forward. What has happened with CARICOM? I remember way back in 1988 when I was a student in Jamaica, I'd written a paper on Caribbean unity, and I talked about the full circle thesis, where we had come from federation into where we were in CARICOM. But then again, since then, we have failed to get unanimity in accordance with the Chaguaramas Treaty in anything that we do in CARICOM. We see heads of government attacking each other in diplomatic terms, but the point about it, they're still that concerned. And there's no real attempt to fix CARICOM. And I think that is one of the challenges as we talk about the resolve.
Mm-hmm.
We need to fix CARICOM. CARICOM needs to be fixed, and we need to look back now. And when we say look back, go back to the foundation. What does the Treaty of Chaguaramas tell us? What needs to be fixed from that Treaty of Chaguaramas coming forward? We still don't have that Caribbean unity. And I reference this. Why does Trinidad and Tobago have to have a high commission in South Africa, and Jamaica has to have a high commission in South Africa? Why do we?
There was just not a unified foreign policy, and I was thinking about that too. Not a unified CARICOM foreign policy at all.
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, it was further strengthened when we had the election of the Commonwealth Secretary General. Remember, Jamaica put forward their own candidate in that regard.
Yeah.
Could we go with a common Caribbean perspective? And we've never been able to get that Caribbean community and that unity. And that is something what we need to deal with. And our heads of government, having, somebody asked me recently, how could we fix some of these things? And I said, look at the European Union. The European Union started long after CARICOM. But one of the things that the European Union have working for them is the European Parliament. They meet regularly. We meet twice a year on heads of government meeting. The various commissions of CARICOM, whether CUSOD or all of those other commissions, I think they probably meet once a year if they meet so often. Some of them have not met for years. We need to find mechanisms where our Caribbean member states of CARICOM could sit down together and come up with common positions. We have not been able to do that, and that is where the Treaty of Chaguaramas lets us down in how we go forward.
And let me bring back Cabral here on this issue of CARICOM, suppose, dysfunction.
Yes.
So what the professor said.
I thought that CARICOM surrendered a great opportunity to unite at a time when troops were being built up in their backyard, at a time when the USS Gerald Ford was being deployed into the region. You could clearly see that military action was imminent, and CARICOM at that time could have taken the opportunity to convene an emergency meeting, formulate a joint policy, because the existence of CARICOM, the purpose of CARICOM is not merely economic integration and free movement. The purpose of CARICOM is to be a block of countries that can take a position on issues and have a stronger voice in the world to be able to advocate on behalf of its region under circumstances like these. And so CARICOM had an opportunity to emerge, take a joint position, and to play a more constructive role as perhaps a mediator, and to push forward with UN resolutions, because we're all members of the United Nations, and to take a joint position. And that would have been a much more constructive action on the part of CARICOM that could have maybe had an impact on the outcome of this matter. But CARICOM sat there, they watched the troops build up in the region, they said very little. Those that spoke on an individual national basis as opposed to taking a joint position. We saw arguments developing between the Prime Minister of Trinidad and the Prime Minister of Antigua while this crisis is deepening. We saw different leaders and their surrogates interfering in local elections, whether it was in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example. We saw Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt making comments about the election that was upcoming at the time in Trinidad and Tobago. So all of this interference internally helped to divide CARICOM. And then you had the chair of CARICOM, who was Andrew Holness at the time. He was, in fact, the first prime minister, and this predates the aggression of the United States, who came out and said that drug dealers and gangs need to be treated like terrorists. And he said that publicly. He reiterated that at the Caribbean, the CARICOM heads of government meeting. And so these prime ministers are dealing with different issues. I mean, they're having over 700 and 800 murders per year in Jamaica. The murder rate is also extremely high in Trinidad. And so you can see along these lines, countries that are dealing with drug problems, fracturing over the issue. But I thought that all in all, that it was a lost opportunity for CARICOM to step forward and unite over an issue that was obviously going to affect every single member state. And I just want to say this on the question of a rules-based international order. Every legal rule, when you're talking about interpreting statute, interpreting law, there's different what the lawyers refer to as canons of construction. So you could interpret a law literally based on its literal meaning. You could interpret a law based on what were the intentions of the framers of that particular law or that particular statute or that particular treaty when we're talking about international law. And we can interpret a law based on what would be the outcome for society, because there's something that's very important in law that strict legal interpretation doesn't take account of, and that's public policy. So what would be the outcome of an international global order where states were prohibited from taking action simply because the individual who was accused was a head of state or protected by immunity, for example? Then theoretically, you could have heads of state committing egregious acts of illegality, and they'll be with impunity, and there's no recourse for that. So there has to be an interpretation of the international law that takes into consideration public policy, that takes into consideration public safety, takes into consideration what were the intentions of the framers of that particular law. And that is how judges construct and interpret these laws before they make their judgments.
We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style. And so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
It's a very interesting question.
The Bub Reports with Dr. Kellon Bub. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
Hi everyone. The Bub Report is committed to being fearless, balanced, and independent, bringing you the stories that matter most without compromise. Now do us a favor. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. You can also watch us on GBN TV every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Catch us on WPG10 television every Sunday at 8 p.m. Your support helps us to keep journalism free from bias and influence. And together, we can make sure every voice is heard and every fact is verified. Thanks for watching.
Should your loved ones pass on?
Let me bring in Dr. Soverigniy again, and we have to remember that Dr. Soverigniy is a Cuba specialist. You've done a lot of work on Cuba, the U.S. embargo on Cuba, and so on. In respect of CARICOM's response here, do you, Dr. Soverigniy, do you feel as if, again, and I'm titling the program this week as the Monroe Doctrine, that like what we're seeing in Europe, I mean, everyone seems to be bending the knee to the personification of the Monroe Doctrine that we're seeing now in Donald Trump. I mean, you know, in England, they had to give him a full royal welcome in order to eke out a particular trade deal with him, right? You have here in the United States very prominent legal firms. They have agreed to do pro bono work for him so that he doesn't sue them for things. I mean, we've seen the sort of mafia don, and again, I use the word don here. But do you think that is also a reflection of what might be happening in CARICOM? That there is just this fear of raw, naked American imperialism and what it can do to the region?
I think there are nuances here, but I think first and foremost, it's naked American imperialism, brutal American imperialism. What we see returning, and this has been talked about by many serious legal international scholars, I can give you all of the names, and so forth. Adi Imsis, who's an advisor to the UN Security Council, and so forth. Even Jeffrey Sachs has come forward, right? A very famous intellectual, and said what we see is might is right is returned. One of the things that the international legal framework after the Second World War was aimed at was basically completely eliminating the use of force or the threat of use of force from international relations and so forth. The United States with Donald Trump has returned that front and center, overtly and covertly, right? And people are terrified. I'm not surprised that after, you know, the very open demonstration of U.S. power by the kidnapping of Nicholas Maduro, and the open attack that killed, you know, we don't know how many people were killed actually in Caracas and how many were civilians, that anybody would be terrified, especially when you come from a small state. There's a fear of global, this conflagration going completely out of control. He's already talked about any means possible, up to military, to consider seizing Greenland and its resources. And Stephen Miller, the ideologue in the White House, has basically said, you know, we have the power. This is the iron law, right? Okay, he's made it very clear. Might makes right. And it's the introduction and elevation of gangsterism and hooliganism to statecraft, right? It's not even statecraft, it's a craft of destruction and so forth. So people are terrified. But, you know, increasingly these contradictions are coming to the fore. And there are many people in Europe. In fact, the Prime Minister of Denmark has talked about invoking Article 5 of the NATO Charter for self-defense. So these are extremely dangerous times, right? And I think it's that's one of the things I think that we have to consider to bear in mind. I want to make the point too, when we talk about a rule-based international order, it's basically who sets the rules, right? It's the imperial diktat. And if we're talking about heads of states doing things, I mean, you already alluded to a person who presided over genocide, being able to go with impunity and so forth. So the issue is that there's numerous people who've committed all sorts of crimes, right? And so forth, and not once have ever been brought forward, right? And when we look at what the United States has done in terms of the imperial aggression it's carried on, and openly and nakedly under Donald Trump, it really, in a sense, behoves very, you know, that really makes it behove us to actually demand that impunity and demand that fundamental international law be upheld, right? And this is what many international lawyers are calling for. This is what many international figures who have prestige like Jeffrey Sachs and others are calling for. And it's a frightening development. But I'm not surprised that CARICOM was tepid. I'm not surprised simply because many of the leaders...
And why is that?
Yeah, I think they're frightened of U.S. power. U.S. power is so overwhelming. I mean, when I think of CARICOM, I think, the issue, one of the problems with CARICOM is that, and I think this was sort of alluded to by Dr. Raghunath, is the fact that we don't have a CARICOM parliament, right? Okay. In a sense, we don't have a role for the masses of people to participate in. CARICOM has been technocratic, elitist on top down. We need to find ways to create the vehicles for the democratic participation of the masses of people. I think a CARICOM parliament is an answer to that question. It's not the total answer. It's a beginning, but to have people have a role in decision-making, in setting policy, but also that gives them a stake in CARICOM itself. And we look at the elections to the European Parliament, it's taken very seriously, and the European Parliament itself becomes a very important space, right, and venue where people can articulate very interesting and views on public policy.
Mm-hmm. So, and Dr. Raghunath, I want to bring you back here again on this whole question of rules-based international order. One of the things I believe that Prime Minister Mia Mottley said was that CARICOM can only properly thrive in the context of a rules-based international order. That it cannot thrive in the context of the type of imperialism that we're seeing with the US, which, by the way, has always been there. But this is sort of a more aggressive and virulent and violent form of it.
Well, clearly, I think that the Prime Minister of Barbados is concerned about where we are going as a region. Mm-hmm. But of course, what she realized, I think, after making such a statement was simply that she was making a statement on her own basis rather than as a spokesperson for and on behalf of CARICOM. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that is where everything fell flat because, again, what we saw her saying there, we have not heard anything more from CARICOM. Why has CARICOM not seen it fit, 3 days after an event like this, to call an emergency meeting? Why has the CARICOM leaders not at least talk to each other? And more importantly, yes, we could talk about rules-based, but again, is it that some prime ministers now are fearful of what could happen if they go against the dominant and the dominance of the United States imperialism? And more importantly, people want their visas. Isn't that the letter of the day? That they want visas so that we want free travel into the United States. So we'll do whatever we can. The suggestions, for instance, coming out is that, from some parts of the Caribbean, is simply that what the policies adopted by both the Antigua government and the Dominica government in the last 48 hours suggest that they are willing to bend over backwards in order that they get access to the United States. Of course, while they were bending over backwards, the US came and dropped another bombshell on them and says, all right, you're now going to pay the bond. The bond.
The 15,000. And that is what a bully will do, right? A bully will keep coming back. Go ahead, Dr. Saini, if you wanted to add.
Yeah, I was just saying, just to build on what Dr. Raghunath was saying, and it's not just visas, right? It's like people have families, right? Okay, and you'll be disconnected. I was talking to a former teacher of mine. I won't say who it was, in Trinidad and Tobago. I went to Naparima College, right? And we were talking, and they were opposed to all of this, right? They're terrified, right? But she was saying at the same time that they have family members, right? They will be disconnected from their families. Then there is the issues, obviously, of being excluded from the U.S. markets and so forth, right? And facing U.S. economic sanctions. And in this national security strategy that was released, they talk very clearly in it about supporting and putting in place governments that align with their views and so forth, right? So this is very clearly, it's as interventionist and shocking as we believe. And, it's one thing to anticipate and know the history. It's one thing to experience it. And, while I am, very aware of how U.S. imperialism has acted in the region, to actually wake up to what had happened, right? It really is a shocking thing. It demonstrates it's a fundamental reality. So this is the issue, and it's imperial diktat. And, it's not a debate. I mean, this is what Trump says openly. This is what Stephen Miller says. This is what Marco Rubio says. This is what the national security strategy says. There's no ambiguity. There's no nuance. There's no nicety. This is naked U.S. imperialist power as they attempt, and we would argue, to offset their relative economic decline internationally, right? Okay, in order to cement their role as the hegemon on the world stage, which they're trying to maintain their dominance. And that requires, as they said, an America's first strategy to basically oust any competitors from the Latin America. And in fact, this even goes back to Blinken, and even goes back to Obama, who had a pivot to Asia. But then Blinken, who was Secretary of State under Biden, said that Latin America was the front line of struggle against China, right? So there's all of these geopolitical contradictions that are coming to the fore. And islands such as the Caribbean, these small states, quite often face, floating on these mighty tides of imperial rivalry, right? And so on. And I think Dr. Raghunath has been very correct. We're stronger united, our voices united, right? And why CARICOM has found it difficult to issue a united statement, I think sort of speaks to the kind of bullying you're talking about.
But I want us to pick up. Yes, Brother Douglas, I'll get you to chime in quickly to add, and then we'll go on to another point. Before
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it has anything to do with the bullying. I mean, if you're talking about state sovereignty, a lot of these governments have sold, like we in Dominica, for example, 60% of our reoccurring budgetary expense are coming in from the sale of our own passports. We've sold tens of thousands of passports. We almost have more passports sold than we have actual natural-born Dominican citizens. So we come entirely dependent on the sale of our own passports. And this is something that our founding fathers would have frowned upon, to struggle for independence against the colonialists, to turn around and sell our own passports for a living. I mean, in the case of Dominica, we've sold diplomatic passports, which is a clear violation of the Vienna Conventions. We have sold diplomatic passports to criminals. We haven't reported to the parliament or the people of Dominica who our ambassadors are. And so, if anything, we have our own skeletons in the closet. Did CARICOM come out? Yeah. Did CARICOM come out and make a statement to condemn governments for selling CARICOM passports to criminals? They never did that. Did CARICOM come out and make a statement when RSS forces were deployed to Dominica to put down demonstrations of people seeking electoral reform, which is enjoyed by most countries in the region? They did not. So CARICOM leaders themselves have to look themselves in the mirror and say, why do we exist? What is our purpose? What do we stand for? And is there any real basis upon which we could unify and take a principled stance on what it is that we're prepared to tolerate within our own region? Because if anybody's undermined the sovereignty of Caribbean nations, it's not the United States. It's the individuals selling their own passports, and not only to seek investment. And a lot of these proceeds from the passport sales are not even coming into the treasury of the country. So, for example, we have agents selling passports in Dubai, in China, all over the world. We don't know how much they're selling our passports for. The proceeds are not coming into the treasury. So these are mercenaries that have control of our country, have control of our passports, and the people of Dominica, the people of the region, are not seeing any benefit to this. The only impact it's having on them is having their rights restricted. Their rights to enter the United Kingdom has been restricted. Their rights to enter the EU now is under scrutiny. The United States have put a pause on all visa applications, and now they're having to pay the bond. A lot of this is due to the reckless behavior of our own governments. So we need to clean up our act first before we start pouring.
Absolutely clean house. But again, I'm going to put out this thought process, perhaps as a rhetorical question. Does it mean that because our backyards are dirty, that gives the U.S. the authority to come and enable prescriptions for cleaning up our backyards? I'm just going to put it out there as a rhetorical question.
When we decide to sell passports to individual criminals that are a threat to the international security infrastructure and are able to access the United States, potential terrorists we're talking about from Afghanistan, then the United States has every right to say, that you need special visa requirements to enter our country because we no longer trust the passports that you're issuing and who you're issuing them to. That's well within the rights of the United States. As a matter of fact, we're selling passports to individuals that have no requirement to know where Dominica is on a map, to visit Dominica, to reside in Dominica.
Which again,
but I have a question for you, Cabral. Okay,
yes.
Mr. Alex. So if the U.S. has that right, okay, okay, and do other countries have the right then, when the United States has been one of the greatest purveyors of violence on the world stage, financing a genocide, not just in Gaza, but in Sudan, and in the Congo, right, and so forth? Should we not have a double standard? I mean, I have no problem saying that, you know, there's governance in the Caribbean that needs to be cleared up and needs to, you know, obviously be dealt with, right? But at the same time, we can't have double standards and hold that the U.S. is some sort of paragon.
No, I agree with you. I agree. There should not be a double standard. But what I'm talking about here is the very symbol, according to Ralph Gonsalves, of our independence, of our sovereignty. Yeah. That passport has a sacred value. We have decided that we are going to make this our main export. We stopped selling bananas. We stopped planting dashi. We don't have factories in Dominica. Yeah. Well, every single project in Dominica is being financed by the sale of our passports. We're selling passports to build an airport, but we can't use the airport because our passport is no longer respected anywhere in the world. So you see,
I think context again. I think one of the reasons why not only Dominica can't sell bananas is because they removed the preferential agreements that enabled us to sell our bananas in the first place. Again, a neoliberal dictate. But I do want to get back though, and that's the final point, gentlemen, before we get to closing comments, because I want to respect your time. To this idea of the national security strategy. And I found it curious that the United States, in the national security strategy, they articulated the view that they are going to openly support, parties, whether in opposition or in government, who are aligned to their views. And it does appear, and I'm noticing a pattern here, that perhaps the countries where there are leaders, whatever you think of the leaders, and Mr. Douglas, you've just articulated what is happening in Dominica with respect to the successor to your dad of the Labour Party there, that's Mr. Skerritt. At least let us look at what has been happening. So in the context of Antigua and Barbuda, again, a progressive government there, not ideological necessarily aligned to the US. Dominica, again, let's park what's happening with the CBI aside and all of that. Grenada, right? What has been happening in the context of at least those three, and to a certain extent, St. Lucia. But in the context of Grenada, I can say this. They first of all, they canceled the visa of a Grenada government minister over the Cuban medical mission that Grenada has in place. That's a U.S. visa to the Minister of Finance, I believe, allegedly. Then they also demanded of Grenada, and Grenada says it's a request for radar to be installed at the Maurice Bishop International Airport. That was subsequently installed in Tobago. Then now we're hearing that another demand is made that Grenada accept third country deportees from the United States. That's another demand. We're not seeing, and then the latest one is that they put a level 2 travel advisory on Grenada, not on St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada's immediate neighbor. And no offense to my friends in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but the crime rate in SVG is higher than Grenada. Grenada has one of the lowest crime rates in the Caribbean, not just the OECS, right? In some parts of Grenada, you can still walk the streets and not worry. I think in all of Grenada, really, you can go and lime somewhere and not worry, about your safety. Granted, there are little rivalries here and there, but it does not rise to the critical mass of criminality that the U.S. is referencing in this report. And I'm saying all of this to say, gentlemen, do we see that targeting in real time in respect of what we see in the national security strategy there? Dr. Raghunath, is that something you've been paying attention to? If you can just unmute the mic, sir.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
It is something that we have to pay attention to. We have to pay attention to it. It's not a matter of whether we should or shouldn't. We have to pay attention to it. Because that is where to a large extent, and this is why when we come back to that whole the geopolitics as well as the economic considerations,
Yes.
when Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister said, look, the United States is our biggest trading partner. We have to make sure that we are wary and concerned as to what the United States is asking of us as a region and of us as a country. I understand that request, for instance, with regard to Grenada taking deportees from the US was also made to Guyana yesterday also. We know that Antigua and Dominica has already agreed. So clearly what we are going to be seeing more and more of is the United States come into the region and, as somebody said, bullying the region into accepting what the United States is proposing to us. If we don't want to accept it, we stand isolated and we stand to some extent alienated from the whole process of where we go from here. Now, to some extent, people have asked me, oh Lord, so the Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister to take the right decision when she decided to throw her stocks in behind the US at the beginning of this whole episode. And I said, we are yet to see. Because, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to say earlier on that I did not say yet is that the United States have always done what's in the United States' interest. And it is not in anybody else's interest. The fact of the matter that on Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon when President Trump had his media conference saying what had happened with Maduro, one of the things he made clear of is simply that Machado was no longer going to be considered as a possible replacement for in the government of Venezuela.
Well, maybe that's because she got the Nobel Peace Prize and he didn't.
And I immediately wrote to some of my colleagues and I asked a question. So you know that Kamala had supported Trump, and now that Trump has gotten what he wanted, can we expect that Kamala will face a similar fate as Machado did? And because he no longer needs Kamala Posad-Bissessa. So we really have to wait and see to the extent to which the US government is going to try to force itself onto the lives of the Caribbean people, ensuring that it has its own control over the geopolitics of this region. And one of the things that we could have mentioned earlier on, because I am not sure, and I'm saying this as a political scientist, I am not sure that oil was the major issue with regard to Trump's action in Venezuela. I think it had more to do with the geopolitics and keeping China out. And that is going to reflect on all of the states in the Caribbean, which has had good relations with China and having China assist in their development.
So many tea leaves here. I want to bring in Professor Sonny. I saw you motioning. You wanted to add.
No. I just want to say I agree, Doctor. I mean, in the small piece I published in the Express, I made this point about China. Right? I think I think he's right. It's oil is one of the issues, but it's more about oil. Oil is a fact. Is part of the geopolitical factors, right? And Trump himself said, "Why is China, getting oil from Venezuela and so forth?" And it's become very clear in a number of publications coming out of the Pentagon that they see China as their principal rival, right? And there's been debates within U.S. ruling circles about how to deal with China's rise, okay? How to deal with this. And this hyper-aggressiveness, this hyper-imperialist stance of Trump represents a position that a significant section of the financial oligarchy have coalesced around, right? In terms of how to preserve U.S. hegemony on the world stage, or dominance, right? And how to rein China in and so forth. This really, as I said, speaks, as Dr. Raghunath points out, to the dangers that face all of us. I mean, the U.S. does not, and Kissinger made this very clear. We just have interests. We don't have friends. What they have are blunt tools they use, and then they toss them away.
Gentlemen, Mr. Douglas, I'll bring you in here because I want you to pick up on, and then we'll get to closing comments. International relations is so fascinating, yet can be so scaringly fascinating sometimes. because it's really scary. It's really scary, especially when you can use blunt military and legal instruments. You know. But Mr. Douglas, on the question of the third country deportees, as I was having a conversation with you, our Prime Minister only revealed to the Grenadian people that publicly that, you know, the U.S., you know, made that request, and I put request in air quotes because it's not sort of a mutual mutual thing here. But you articulated the view that, you know, that perhaps the Dominican government ought to have been more transparent over there with respect to that third country deportee situation. I mean, I can speak for Grenada. I don't know where we would accommodate them. Grenada is 133 square miles.
Well, we in Dominica is a very friendly country. It was known for our hospitality and embracing other people, other cultures. And I'm sure the people of Dominica would embrace these individuals. However, the government has an obligation to the people to be more transparent. First of all, if you're going to take a step in this direction, you would require the input of Parliament. It would require to alter or to amend your immigration laws, your current immigration laws and naturalization laws. So you need to have a parliamentary debate in order to look at the positives and the potential negatives and the details in terms of how many people are coming in, what plans are in place, how are we going to fund housing, how are we going to fund education, how are we going to fund health. And a lot of these public services are currently under pressure in Dominica as it is. So there are a number of social factors that will also need to factor into the debate. There's never been a debate, much less a bill presented to Parliament to amend the current immigration laws. It was simply something that was said in passing during a press conference on the Maduro apprehension. So I think that that has rubbed Dominicans up the wrong way, because Dominicans don't fully understand what they're getting themselves into, and Dominicans don't really appreciate a leader who is prepared to make these unilateral decisions that have such far-reaching implications for the people of Dominica in terms, and Dominica is a very small place. It's big in terms of the context of the Caribbean. It's bigger than Antigua, bigger than Barbados, bigger than St. Kitts, most of the smaller islands in the Caribbean. I think it's with the exception of Jamaica, Guyana, and Trinidad, I think it might be the biggest island. But in terms of population, it has one of the smallest populations in the Caribbean. The last census, the population was under 70,000 people. And then after the various hurricanes, we haven't had a census, and a lot of people have migrated after that. So it's quite likely that Dominica could have a population just over 50, 60,000 people. So to say that you're going to introduce foreigners at a scale that nobody knows into this population, maybe they're from different cultures, maybe they speak different languages, maybe they worship different gods, different religions, it's going to have a social impact. And it's something that, like I said, Dominicans are very compassionate people and welcoming people, hospitable people, but they need to be involved in the process to understand exactly what it is that we're getting ourselves into. And that has not taken place. There's been no intention by the scared administration to involve the people of Dominica, because the decision has already been made and the agreement has already been signed. And that is very undemocratic, in my opinion, in the opinion of the United Progressive Party. And we call on the government of Roosevelt Skerrit to come clean and provide the details and approach the Parliament and do things in a democratic way.
But Mr. Douglas, you know, you're talking about, you know, all of the funding and all of that. Should the United States not be funding that? And first of all, I'm not too sure why they would want to send third country nationals to islands that are already stretched with respect to housing and with respect to its own revenue and expenditure basis. It's already stretched thin as it is to provide services for its own people. And in all of these conversations, I'm not hearing anything about what the United States is doing. At least we know in the context of Grenada, China, they give us public housing. You know, they gave hundreds of scholarships every year. I mean, you just rat it out, and you can tell what China, what Venezuela, after multiple hurricanes, one of the first, people that arrive in Grenada are the Venezuelans. So do you get what I'm saying? Because there is nothing there. And I agree with you that there ought to be some transparency. Maybe the U.S. is providing that support. We don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that it could be simply that the U.S. is providing a fixed sum of money to the government of Dominica. And that would be something that, I mean, we've got accustomed to the transactional nature of selling passports. That's how we survive in Dominica. If passport sales were to end tomorrow, we would be back at the IMF because we wouldn't be able to pay public servants. We wouldn't be able to pay teachers and police officers. We certainly wouldn't be able to continue with any of the capital projects in the country, which is all funded by the Citizenship by Investment Program. So if the government saw an opportunity, for example, and I'm speculating here, to receive a lump sum per individual that was coming into the country, it would take on a similar nature to the sale of passports, because these people are coming in presumably to become citizens of the country and be issued with passports for a fee. And that's currently what we're surviving on right now. The only difference is that the people that are sold the passports currently are not interested in coming to Dominica. They're interested in going to the United States and into Europe visa-free, which is something that those governments have clamped down on, and they're well within their right to do so. And once this passport sale business comes to a screeching halt, we have not prepared ourselves. We have not diversified our economy. We have not invested in our future to be able to mitigate against the loss of income that will derive from any disruption to the passport sale business. So Dominica is on the precipice of some very tough times. And it's not only because of the Trump administration, it's also because of our inability to prepare ourselves from the inevitable decline of the passport selling business. Can you imagine depending on 60% of your revenue is depending on selling your own passport to foreigners? That's absolutely unacceptable, but that's the situation that we're in. So what Dominica requires right now is a group of the leading intellectuals, the leading brains to come together and figure out a way how to navigate, how we're going to circumvent these tremendous challenges into the future, how we're going to put our people to work, how we're going to develop our resources. We have some of the best, cleanest natural water in the world. We have, I'm not apologizing to say, the most beautiful nature island of the Caribbean in the world. We have the best, some amazing soil, and we just got to find a way to diversify and build our economy that's not solely dependent on selling passports.
Much more sustainable and outside of the box thinking. Gentlemen, this is such an important conversation, and as I articulated earlier, having informed views on these matters, I think, is what ought to help our people get through this. Again, on the Bub Report, what we try to do is to not only engage in journalism, but use the journalism for public education. So, gentlemen, what I want to do is to go over to you all for some closing comments, but we will take a quick break and come back for that. So please stand by, folks, for those closing comments.
We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
Leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style, and so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
Why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
This is a very interesting question.
The Bub Reports with Dr. Kelon Bub. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
Hi everyone. The Bub Report is committed to being fearless, balanced, and independent, bringing you the stories that matter most without compromise. Now do us a favor. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. You can also watch us on GBN TV every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Catch us on WPG10 television every Sunday at 8 p.m. Your support helps us to keep journalism free from bias and influence. And together, we can make sure every voice is heard and every fact is verified. Thanks for watching. Viewers and listeners, thank you for staying with us this week. And of course, we want to thank our panelists. I know that Cabral is all the way in Australia. I don't know what time it is there. What time is it in Australia, Cabral?
It's just 9:30 a.m.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being flexible, sir. So what I want to do is to go over to Dr. Raghunath for some closing comments. 2026, and I suppose the immediate period, there is 3 more years of this administration in Washington, a very ubiquitous administration that, now we're hearing about what might happen in Greenland. I'm not too sure who's going to go next. I mean, I don't know. We have no oil in Grenada. We only have old oil for jab for carnival. So I don't know if you want that, but Dr. Raghunath, over to you, sir, for some closing comments.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. What I will tell you is simply that Trinidad has oil. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how much they want of Trinidad's oil, but the fact of the matter is simply one which says that as a Caribbean community, we need to get serious. We need to get serious. We need to think about unity. We need to have a common foreign policy that we could deal with, not only with the United States, but with the European Union and with other the major players in the world. And to start to do that, however, is that we have to start getting mechanisms in place within CARICOM to ensure that at least the voices of the people are heard, not only the voices of the leaders. As Mr. Douglas would have said earlier on, the first person to come out and says they supported the U.S. coming in here and dealing with the drug dealers as terrorists was the Prime Minister of Jamaica. That was followed by the Prime Minister of Trinidad says, kill them violently, okay? But the point about it here is simply one which says, do we have a common policy? And are we willing to make the effort to come up with a common policy? CARICOM means 2 things. I always tell people: the Caribbean Economic Community and the Caribbean community. We need to build the Caribbean community, and that is something that unless our leaders, I mean, the other way I put it is simply: we all want to be leaders in hell rather than servants in heaven. We have to find a way to talk to each other, come up with a common policy, and move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Professor Saini, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us on such short notice. And I want to thank my very good friend, Chevy, for facilitating this in many respects. Although I sat with you on another panel before, but I want to thank him for that direct introduction.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure it was a pleasure being with you on that other panel. It's a pleasure being a guest on your show. And Dr. Chevy Eugene is a wonderful colleague, and I was glad to be here. I'd like to say is that the Caribbean is at a crossroads, and I think one path leads towards deeper integration and subordination into the U.S. imperial strategy, which leads to permanent, subjugation and elite consolidation. The other path, far more difficult but far more necessary, in my opinion, demands recommitting to Caribbean unity as a living emancipatory project rooted in popular sovereignty, reparatory justice, and I would argue ecological survival, because the Caribbean is probably the most vulnerable to climate change. Will the Caribbean accept fragmentation as its fate, or will this rupture that we're sort of living through now provoke a renewed pan-Caribbean struggle for a future beyond empire? The dream of one Caribbean has always been fragile and contested. Will it be buried, or will it be reborn in a form capable of meeting the multiple and intersecting crises of our time?
Thank you so much. And Brother Douglas, over to you, sir, for some closing comments.
Absolutely. Let me just thank Keelan Bob and the Bob Report for hosting this very dynamic discussion. More of these need to take place. And let me just thank all of your viewers in Grenada, the larger Caribbean, and the world. We appreciate you tuning in and talking about this Caribbean experiment. I mean, going back to 1958 to 1962, when we had the experiment with the Caribbean Federation, we had ambitious goals at that time. We had courageous leaders at that time. Unfortunately, that experiment wasn't able to see us through, but the goals have remained the same. We need to unite as a people and be able to integrate economically. That's one of the tenets of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, 1973. But as has been articulated on this program, a lot of the instruments of CARICOM have to be institutionalized. Starting with the CCJ, we need more countries to sign up to that CCJ so we could have some transparency, and we could also show confidence in our own regional institutions. If you can imagine that the CCJ is actually based in the Port of Spain, but litigants, when they
is not a part of it,
have to go to UK just because of the fact that the treaty hasn't been ratified by the Trinidadians. Same thing goes for Jamaica. So we need to ratify those agreements. We need to take as has been articulated, we need to take a common position on international issues. We need to take a common position on regional issues. And the fact that we could have major artillery being mobilized into our region and we couldn't find the fortitude to come together and to make a decision that looks beyond our own borders is testimony to the fact that what Camilla Bissat-Possessa has said about CARICOM being an unreliable partner. We have to be real. We have to be real and understand that there is merit to this. Now we're entering into a phase where the indictment has suspected that there are individual Caribbean leaders that could be indicted as well. So individuals are going to be protecting their own personal interests. So we need to stand out and be courageous on issues that are internal to the Caribbean. When RSS forces descend on the sleeping elderly folks of Libya in Dominica, CARICOM needs to stand out and investigate that. We cannot have a situation where Salisbury people are being assaulted with expired tear gas while they're sleeping because they're agitating for electoral reform. These are the kind of things that undermines the people's confidence in an institution like CARICOM. So CARICOM is a necessary entity. It's not optional. The rest of the world is uniting and protecting their interests. We as a region are very small territories. There's strength in numbers. So we need to unite, take a common position, and be courageous about calling out injustice that occurs within our own backyard so that we can have the confidence of the people that we represent. Once the people in the region lose confidence in CARICOM, then CARICOM just becomes a talk shop that has conferences every once in a while and nobody really pays attention to it. So once CARICOM begins to reassert itself and lay down some principled positions, then I think the future could look bright. And I'm very hopeful that CARICOM can reorganize itself and have a bright future so that the people of the region could also have a bright future.
Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, we have to, as we say in Grenada in local parlance, we have to ban we belly because we are in for a rough ride. You know, when the pilot says put your seatbelts on, because you know that turbulence is we have to buckle our belts with respect to everything that's happening. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us this week, and have a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Viewers and listeners, that was our panel segment of the week, having a conversation dissecting CARICOM's reaction to the developments that occurred in Caracas. Of course, the context here is important, that many CARICOM states have historically had significant diplomatic ties with the government and people of Venezuela going way back before the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. I believe Grenada established diplomatic relations with Venezuela in the late 70s under the Eric Gary government, so that this issue of what occurred in Venezuela certainly has significant regional implications for the Caribbean. And as we like to say on the Bub Report, we must watch the space to see what will unfold, because I suspect there are many more imperialist hammers that will be coming down the pike. So, folks, again, on behalf of the producers of the Bub Report, I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellan Bub, wishing everyone a pleasant week, and we'll see you for the next week's edition of the program. Thanks again. Bye-bye.